understanding of your word, Father. Just pray that you bless Larry with wisdom and understanding of your word, and just bless him with the words to speak. And may this time be of getting to know you better, Lord, and draw closer to you. Just bless this service today, Father. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, good job. So let's go ahead here. I feel like that's loud. Okay. So before we read chapter 4, I wanted to go over just a couple notes with you. The last time I did the class, I told you I read different commentary books. This is a different one here. I try to always read them with an open mind, because just because someone that is smarter than me wrote something down doesn't necessarily mean it will be true. But sometimes hearing a different opinion makes you think a little bit. And so I'm going to just read a couple little things from this that will hopefully give us an overview when we read chapter 4, and then we'll dive into the discussion on it. So one of the things that's going to happen midway here in chapter 4 is Paul, where he's been being, we would maybe say, to the point, harsh, he's going to make more of an emotional appeal. And so we'll recognize that when we get to the middle of the chapter, that he's actually using emotion in his argument. And we'll talk about the components that make up an argument and stuff like that. So first, from verses 8 to 11, Paul acknowledges that there were some types of spirits out there, but he denied that they were gods. So when you see that where he says you're worshiping these gods that are not gods. And then in 17 to 20, neither here nor anywhere else in Galatians did Paul name these troublesome agitators. So there's people, given the new Christians, they're basically agitators. And I was under the assumption it was probably Judaizing teachers, but it's kind of implied that it was more than just the Judaizing teachers. And it goes, the problem with the agitators was not the interest they had shown in the Galatians, but their evil intentions and selfish motivations. So when we read that, see if you see that tone of what is the motivation of these people that are trying to steer the Galatian people away from the true Word of God. And usually motivations like that are control and power and esteem and stuff like that. The Galatians were children born in freedom, but they acted as if they were the descendants of the slave wife. That's when we're going to talk about Sarah and Hagar. And then when he does the story of, I'm assuming most of you have read the chapter, when he talks about Sarah and Hagar, Paul, sometimes when we read verses, let me back up, or parables, we don't know, hey, is this a literal story or is this a parable or an analogy? Paul makes it simple for us. He says this is an analogy. And so when we look at this, it says the Galatians were, okay, we got that. Those things may be taken figuratively, and it says allegorical interpretation seeks to discern a hidden meaning in a given story or context. I don't know that I necessarily believe that it's hidden necessary. It's just telling a story. Here's something you're familiar with, and if you understand the concept of this thing you're familiar with, it may help you better understand this new concept that I'm talking to you about. And then when we look at Sarah and Hagar, under Hagar, we have Ishmael, the son of slavery, Sarah, Isaac, the son of freedom, Hagar, birth according to the flesh, Sarah, birth according to the promise, Hagar, old covenant, Sarah, new covenant, Hagar, Mount Sinai, Sarah, Mount Zion, Hagar, present Jerusalem, and Sarah, heavenly Jerusalem. So if we get to it, we're going to talk about what's the difference when this was written between present Jerusalem and heavenly Jerusalem, and what does that mean? How does that apply to us today? And so this analogy he's using of Sarah and Hagar, it's twos. It talks about the son, the woman, the covenant, the location of Sinai versus Zion, and then present Jerusalem versus heavenly Jerusalem when we get to that part. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting, and this is something new that I recently realized, says it talks about sorry about that. It talks about, not Isaac, no, I'm sorry, hold on here. Ishmael, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it talks about Ishmael, and it kind of gives us the impression that Ishmael harassed Isaac a lot. And so what's interesting, if we go back and we read the story of Sarah and Hagar, we may say like, man, it doesn't sound fair. I mean, Ishmael had no say of where he was going to be born or who or what. Now he's cast out, doesn't have a dad. And we go, man, that seems kind of harsh. But then when we read something later on, we learn more about what the real situation is. Kind of like when we talk about Balaam in the LTC classes. So we look at Balaam and we're like, why is he such a bad guy? He's going to God. He's doing what he says. He tries to circumvent the system, but he doesn't seem like that bad of a guy. And then we read later on in the New Testament, like, oh, there was some missing information there that formed, that described who the character of this person was. And so I think that's important for us to recognize that sometimes when we read something and we're like, well, that doesn't seem right, know that if it's inspired and written by God, it is right, and we may just not have the full story, okay, when we do those types of things. So let's go ahead and start. Kevin, you covered the first 6 verses, but let's go ahead and just read them again to try to put everything in context. There's 31, so let's do 5 apiece just to start out.
Okay.
And the last person, just finish up the last verse.
Want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the day set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons.
And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather, to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain.
Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that, if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me.
Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I am present with you, my little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you.
Tell me, you who want to be under law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise. This is allegorically speaking, for these women are 2 covenants, one proceeding from Mount Sinai bearing children who are to be slaves, she is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, where she is in slavery with her children.
But the Jerusalem above is free, she is our mother, for it is written, Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the desolate so it is now also. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman.
Okay, any comments on that before we dive into this?
One more verse.
Oh.
So then, brethren, we are not children of bondwoman, but of the free woman.
Okay, good, thank you. So any comments? No? Okay. So I'm going to lay a little foundation here again as we get into this. So this is 2 Corinthians 11, 3 and 4. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent was beguiled Eve through his subtlety or simplicity, so your minds will be, corrupted by the simplicity in Christ. And so one of the things that's interesting here is the gullibility of people. And usually when we think, how could people be so stupid, let's just say? How can they believe such a false thing? We look at that, and it goes all the way back to here, like Eve was tricked. Don't you fall into that trap, into the simplicity of Jesus. So I wanted to ask the question, I'm going to try and have a lot of class involvement today here, if you guys are up for it. How are people being tricked today in a simple way? Let me ask you a question. Can a man have a baby? No. Right?
Well, Paul's talking about that here. He says that he's like, let's see, my little children for whom I am in the anguish of childbirth. But I don't think that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I think what he's referring to, and I could be wrong, is that supposedly, I don't know, childbirth is very painful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true.
And so there's a verse that says, the earth groans waiting for the day of salvation. And we could go off on a little bit on that, but when Adam and Eve sinned, God, one of the curses of God was he cursed the earth. And so what was very good, which if God says it's very good, is near perfect, if not perfect, is no longer good anymore. So the earth we live in isn't the same earth that God created. And that verse, which I believe is probably metaphorical, gives the idea that the earth not being very good anymore, that it's just waiting for the day. And then when we get into the childbirth, the pain, he's groaning, kind of like an analogy of the earth saying, I just can't wait till this is all over and everything's okay. Comments on that? No? So we see this today where trickery is used a lot, and we look back then and we think, we look at this and say, how could these, Galatian people be so quickly tricked after hearing the truth? How can they want to go back to what they had, and then yet we see the same thing today? And usually when we see it today, we think it's everybody else that is gullible. Yeah, it's probably us also. Okay, so we could look at transgender. You could decide what you want to be. There's examples in certain places where they have a cat box in the bathrooms because a person may decide to be a cat, and I'm not making that up. I'll give you another one, not to get too political, but that doesn't matter, okay? Someday there will be a day of reckoning, maybe not in our lives, but someday there will be.
What's interesting is one thing I really like to think of is as like the cat box, the transgenderism, the issues like that, is the concept of genealogy of ideas, where an idea comes from. Because it's not like somebody woke up out of nowhere and said, I'm going to be a cat. Like everybody's going to think that's okay. I'm not going to have any issues. Like,
count himself as equality
himself,
with
yeah.
God, yeah.
So,
Yeah, so it starts with a lie, and the easiest lie to believe is the one that most closely resembles the truth and is what you want to hear. And then that creates a premise, and then that premise becomes truth, and then upon that truth we build other premises where we say, well, if this premise is true, then this is okay, and it leads us further and further down the road. That's why when we see the little things, we need to try to deal with them right away. So what's interesting about this verse is it also, and who knows, hopefully I'll get to it actually. But let's keep on talking. This is good. The other is, it says, do not be corrupted by the simplicity in Christ. If there is simplicity in Christ, why does it seem so complicated sometimes? And by the way, there's a verse that says God is not the author of confusion. So if God's not the author and Christ, it's simple, why is it complicated sometimes?
try to make it about ourselves.
Right.
We want to have the part, we want to have control. And so you don't give all glory and all credit to God for everything he's done. Like,
Right.
well, a part of this has to come from me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like these teachers, they're using belief systems to try to control people and have power over people. And then, I have a saying, I'm too, I say it humbly, but I'm too stupid to have ended up here on my own. We really got to give God the credit for everything that we have. So,
In Proverbs it says, acknowledge him in all thy ways, so that he can direct thy path. And Satan doesn't want us to do that. He wants to have confusion. And look what happens when there's confusion.
yeah,
I mean, every evil way shows up there. Talk about this genderism and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if I mentioned before, to me it's really simple, is Satan hates how God created man, male and female, and he hates that. And so he goes, hey, I want to change this. Anything opposite of what God wants it to be comes from Satan. And we as God's people have to recognize that and stand with that. And what was the first Satan? That's Satan that we have a record of. Question God.
Yeah.
How he wants it to be.
right.
Just sow a little bit of doubt, and the lie has come.
And then they build up, yeah. Real quick, 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5. The weapons we fight are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So again, part of some of the responsibilities we have as Christians is to demolish these false arguments. So that's why we have classes and talk about these things. This is Colossians 2, 7 and 9. See to it that no one takes you captive by, and some versions say, deceptive philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition and according to the elemental spirits of the world, not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. I'm trying to use the ESV, and I'm just not used to it. So again, we're to have our guard up that we're not taken advantage of by these different types of things happening. And then Galatians 6, 1 to 3. So we're going to be talking about different covenants. And I like this verse here. This is Galatians 6, 1 to 3. Brothers, if anyone is caught up in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. So this is the only place I know of in the New Testament where the teachings of Jesus are considered a law, where it says you fulfill the law of Christ. So is Christ a new law? We have a new covenant. Is Christ's teachings a law?
Well, even even Jesus says it kind of like that in the upper room with his disciples. He's like, I give you a new commandment that you love one another. It's like, that's not really new.
Yeah.
But it's like the way he's giving it to them has new meaning or new application somehow, you know?
Yeah, I thought when he says that new commandment, I always thought that he ups the ante and says,
right.
you got to be willing to die for your
Praise the
neighbor.
Lord.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah,
Talking about that, he says that ye love one another as I have loved you. And later on he goes and says that in the next verse, he says, no greater love hath any man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. That lay down his life does not mean death. So Jesus, when he says to love one another as he loved us, how is that? What did he do? What did he show his disciples there that he loved them? Is he laid down the life that he had with his heavenly Father, all the power, all the glory in heaven. He laid that all down to come. And because of that love was so great, he's saying, that's what I want you to do now, is to love one another as I have loved you. No greater love to lay down, means to kneel before your friends. Say, I'm your servant. I lay down my life, my goals, my dreams, my business. I lay that all down because of my love for you. I'm here for you. Jesus says, that's how I want you to love one another.
yeah, good, thank you. So we'll get into the text here in just a sec. So as I was going through all of this, I was thinking about how Paul, to me, is really just the master of making the best arguments in the world, just the way he approaches everything. And so I just went on a little tangent about, well, what constitutes an argument? And so first of all, an argument is an act of expressing a point of view on a subject and supporting that view using evidence such as research, statistics, and examples. And then I guess there's some different types. There's I think it's the Rogerian method. There's these different methods. One of them is called the classical method, which is believed that Aristotle first wrote that. I don't necessarily like using Greek philosophers in religion because they weren't Christian people, and I don't always feel that they're the way they see things line up. But one of the interesting things I saw in all of these arguments is, or at least these primary ones, is that nowhere does it say put emotion into what you're doing. Prove to the person that you don't have any motivation other than that you care about them. And what we see Paul doing is saying, I'd do anything for you. We're seeing compassion made in the argument. He's saying, do you want me to be your friend, or do you want me to tell you the truth? And so just an interesting thing. So when you're preparing arguments from a religious point of view, if you're talking, that compassion, I think, needs to be a part of that. When we do Bible studies, when we talk, when we have disagreements, our motivation is that we care. There's no other motivation there, not power or control or anything like that. So, any comments on that? Nope. Okay, so let's, what do I have left here? Okay. We'll do one more, then we'll get into the text here. So then last week, this was kind of interesting. Kevin talked about, what is a dad, from a biblical point of view. And so when I looked at this, one of the things that I believe I've learned is that the greatest bond to obedience is having a good relationship. So when parents discipline children, if there's a relationship there, it's much more powerful than any type of punishment. So in other words, you guys are older there, but when you're 8 years old, 10 years old, there were different forms of punishment. Nowadays they do timeouts. Back then you got spankings. But take all those physical punishments and have the parents say, I am completely disappointed in you. And that's going to hurt more than any of the physical stuff. And so the relationship is really important. So I was like, well, what kind of relationships are there? So there's immediate family, friendships, husband, wife, teammates, work, student-teacher relationships out there. So then the question I was trying to work with is, because we all want to be obedient, right? So how do we help ourselves, aside from prayer and the Spirit, being more obedient to God? Well, we want to have that right relationship. So what is the right relationship with God?
Seems like it needs to be an intimate one, so we spend a lot of time with him, so that we can, that's me praying, that's me reading his word, so I know him.
Mm-hmm.
And, or as Paul said, being known by him.
Go ahead.
The word relationship usually implies a two-way street. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
So yes, we have a relationship. I don't like that word, but we don't have a better word for it.
Right.
But if you look at the Bible, it's a father-son. It's a master-slave. And if you look at what a biblical relationship for a correct parent-child relationship is, your father tells you to do something, you don't ask why, how, you just do what he tells you to do. Same thing with the master and the slave. So we have a relationship with God in the way that we do what he tells us to do. And through that, we grow in him. But it's not, there's nothing we're adding to God. There's nothing we can do on our own to change our relationship or to grow in our faith. Nothing of it comes from us.
Yeah, and the reason relationship is a tough word is, again, it could talk about the workplace, friendships, immediate family, extended family. There's all these different types of relationships. So to take that word, it kind of has a broad meaning. So when we're going through here in Galatians, what type of relationship do we take on with God as new Christians? What do we become? Heirs and what? And sons. And as a result of heirs and sons, what does that? What do we? I hate to use the word "get" out of it, but what are the benefits of that relationship? I don't know if that's the right word. So as an heir and a son, what does that mean? Go all the way back to Abraham? We're saved. We become a part of the of the promises, yeah. And so that talks about that relationship. And so Adam, you touched on it. If we are sons, what does Galatians say that, what type of relationship is that? Is that one of freedom in that relationship part? Or are we a slave to the master? You kind of touched on it.
Kind of both. We're free in the fact that we're free from the consequences of sin through Christ, but we are slaves because we know what we have to do. By disobeying any of those teachings, we're in error.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and as a slave, we need to have respect for a master and
Right.
a healthy fear, knowing
Yeah.
he's over us.
Yeah, Patrice and I usually fly things by her, and I said I'm going to sound like a fundamentalist, but maybe I am one. But most issues of interpretation in the Bible come down to authority, in my opinion. There's certain things where I'll say, hey, I just don't know, but a lot of it just comes down to authority. Do you really believe in God? Do you really believe this is his word? There's interpretation issues on certain things, but a lot of it comes down to authority. One of the interesting things here was they had different types of relationships. One's the daily believer. That's the person that's involved in seeking God daily. Then we got the weekly worshiper. They're the persons that come to church once a week. Then we have the millennials that not that many of them come. And then I thought this was interesting, is the CEO Christians, which do you know what that stands for?
I mean, it's.
Christmas, Easter only.
Okay.
So, anyways, I thought that was kind of funny, but, okay.
Yeah, I heard that as the C&E club, but CEO, that makes sense too.
Yeah, so,
I have one more to add to that. It's more exclusive. An Episcopalian priest one time told me in their denomination, he's like, there's the hatch, match, and dispatch crew. They come when they're born, when they're married, and when they die.
yeah, yeah, so. So let's go ahead here and we'll go to verse 8. So I'll just read 8 to 11. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months, seasons and years. I'm afraid I have labored for you in vain. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, what he's pointing out is we're not slaves to God, we're slaves to demons. In verse 10, you observe days and months and seasons and years. The theme of this is, the book is Judaizing. And so he's saying, you're now holding each other where you have to observe these Jewish holidays, which have nothing to do with you whatsoever.
Right.
And you're making these about salvation, like Passover. We don't have to celebrate Passover.
Right.
That was a foreshadowing of communion, a foreshadowing of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. But, so he's saying you're holding all these holidays and special observances as if it's salvific, and you're making it about these.
Right. Yeah, one of the commentaries I read said that they also believe that that was the Greek gods that they were worshiping, but this is about the Judaizers. So I tend to lean your way more on that. So if people say want to observe, there were 3 main feasts, right? The Feast of Tabernacles, the Passover, and unleavened bread. Was that it? I forget.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that kind of gets tied in with Passover.
Okay.
At the same time.
So is it wrong for us to celebrate those days today? If somebody said, hey, I want to celebrate the Passover, would that be okay? Now, we once did a mock of a Passover to learn about what it was really like, but is it okay to do that today?
I mean, we've had one here, but we did it as Christ did the Passover.
Yeah.
It was focused on him.
Okay. And he says here, I'm afraid for you I have labored in vain. What does he mean by that? Does he mean I'm afraid that I wasted my time? Or is he, and darn it, I could have been doing something better? Or is he afraid that he's concerned about their eternal souls? So what kind of afraid is that?
His concern is their eternal souls.
Yeah.
He's pitching as like, an appeal to how much time he spent with them. Did I waste, however long it was? Was it pointless?
Yeah.
But his concern isn't his time, his concern is their souls, their salvation.
Yeah. So his being afraid is because of the deep love he has for them. It's not, I'm afraid that he's like, I have this deep fear that this just isn't working. Hey, so Kevin, do you want to read 12 to 20?
Sure.
If you don't mind?
Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that, if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I present with you, my little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you.
Okay, so So what do you think about the gouging the eyes out? What's that mean?
Well, he was there for, I mean, he says he was there because he was sick. So
Yeah.
God let him get sick to be there. I know church history, especially with how he let other people write his letters, and then he'd sign at the end, it was not the best. Tradition holds that something was wrong with his eyes.
Yeah, so a lot of
He could
people,
just be an idiot, but
yeah. So he talks about the thorn in the flesh. Some people say it was his eyesight. Some people said he had stomach problems. Other people have said it's malaria. Other people said it was a secret sin that he struggled with. God always said, my grace is enough. But here, it appears that something was more physical than spiritually or internally wrong with him. And it sounds like what he's saying to me, and let's talk about this because commentaries didn't really bring it up, but I think what he's saying to them is, we had such a great relationship that you would have given up your own eyes for me had I needed them, and now have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? So that does kind of make sense in that context. We were so close, you would have given up body parts for me, and now I tell you the truth, and you resent me, or what should I do? Should I let you go this way and be friends with you, or should I tell you the truth and have you despise me? Any thoughts on that?
Do you think that he knows they already despise him, or is he saying that to show that he's sincere? He wishes he could be there like at the end. I wish I could be present with you, probably so you could see my spirit and how much I care about you. And this is like, don't disregard what I'm saying to you. Don't make me an enemy because I'm calling you out on something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it they've already hated him, or is it don't hate me because I'm doing this? Remember how close I am and how much I care about you.
Yeah, I kind of, so one of the ways people cause people to go astray is they badmouth the leaders of whatever that movement is. And so I would tend to go with what you're saying on that, is that these Judaizing teachers or Greeks or whatever that are trying to lead them astray, they're not doing that by saying, hey, we got a better way to do it. They're possibly doing it by saying, you don't want to be listening to this guy, Paul. He's no good. And that they have created friction. I think it's implied here, but again, we're just talking, right? That there was something there where they were actually attacking Paul, not the doctrine. If they were attacking the doctrine, they would have a hard time with the evidence on that. Go ahead.
I was just looking at verse 20, I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone. So I think he's just saying, if I was there, we probably wouldn't have had this problem.
Yeah.
Shut things down and guide them down. But since he's not there, he's writing his letter very, here's how it is. He can't leave room for nuance. He can't leave room for patting somebody on the back. It's very authoritative, and it has to be. It's God's word.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little note saying,
Yeah.
if I was there, like, we could be having a much better conversation now.
Yeah, that happens to me in business sometimes where people will text me, what are rates doing today? I go, well, let me write a page of information for you. But sometimes, have you ever gotten a text message and you're like, man, they sound kind of rude?
Yeah.
That happened to me this morning. I was doing prep on this and Patrice kept texting me and I wanted, will you quit texting me? I'm trying to get ready for the Bible class. Well, that probably would come across being rude if I said to her face to face, hey, I feel like I'm a little behind schedule. Could we talk about this after church? You see what I'm saying? The difference between in person. So I think what he's saying here is if we were in person, you would see my body language. You would hear the tone of my voice. I have to be specific and to the point and put this in a letter. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we insert emojis and stuff like that to try to have some kind of semblance of body, and face. It's just unsafe.
Just make sure before you hit send, it's the right emoji.
Yeah, I know. Oops.
Oops. Wish I could reach through cyberspace and pull that back. Okay, so in 17, He goes, they make much of you, but for no good. They want to shut you out, that you make much of them. So this tells a little bit about the motivation of what these, we'll call them agitators, like, what does this say their emotion is?
I'm not sure if I have the answer to that question. I like how the Amplified brings that verse 17 out. These men, the Judaizers, are zealously trying to dazzle you, but their purpose is not honorable or worthy or for any good. What they want to do is isolate you so that they may win you over to their side and get you to court their favor.
Yeah. I will confess to you, I read the Amplified on this. But that being said, the Amplified is thought for thought versus word for word translation. And so when I read the Amplified, I always do it with a little bit of caution and say, okay, does the way they're reading this really jive with what the word for word translation is? But that paints maybe a more clearer picture in our thought process that these people have deceptive motives. They're wanting to steal them. And why are they wanting to steal them? What does it say the reason is?
To court their favor.
Right. And so that got me on another tangent is, how does that apply to us modern day? Do people use religion to try to control people and have power over them today?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Any examples? Psychology. So that's interesting you bring that up because I go off on these tangents. Some people say I have attention deficit disorder. I say I just have a creative mind. But when you said that, psychology, so I typed in psychology and Christianity, psychology, and power. And it got some real interesting search results on that. But it does appear that through the psychology, that people use the Bible or they use Christianity or any philosophical belief to gain power over other people, to maybe get money, power, control, things like that. Go ahead.
Look at most politicians we have in the United States, how many of them go to the Wailing Wall, take their picture there, and you blast it out, and say, oh, God supports me, or the church has to support me. It's entirely not what the Bible teaches, but they use that to try to build support, not through their actions, not through actually what they're talking about, not what they believe, not what they vote on, but just saying, oh, yeah, I believe what the Bible says, and you need to support me because of that.
Yeah.
Use that picture as a justification.
We're cut out of time, but I was just thinking that verse, very much the way social media and most of the stuff that we take for entertainment today does, it tries to make much of a certain storyline or way or ideology or whatever, and make little of,
Yeah.
a traditional one, and so eventually the new storyline becomes the truth.
Yeah, if you've ever, for fun, read a news story on Fox News and then CNN and see two different, like, is this the same story? And stuff like that. And same thing, social media.
Yes.
You're constantly getting bombarded with ads. I'll talk to somebody and I'll say, yeah, I need to get new tires on the car. And then I'll look, oh, look, I had all these tire ads. And no, your phone doesn't spy on you. And I'm like, well, how did it know? Who found out that I needed tires? So I asked a tech person once, I go, is the phone really listening to us? And he goes, if you can say, hey, Siri, and it replies, it's listening to you. So,
And I think one thing that we always have to keep in mind, like anything or any people group outside of God is actually a tool for Satan. I mean, we don't always see it that way, or at least consciously think of it that way, but when there's something contrary to God, it isn't like, these people are doing this so that we will seek them. Well, what's behind that?
yeah.
Right? I mean, so they're corrupted by battle that's going on behind the scenes that's really trying to use every opportunity and every possible argument to get us away from God.
So the takeaways are, what God is offering is the best out there. It's not even comparable to anything. Beware, there are teachers out there that will try to lead you astray for different reasons. And remember that you are sons of God, and because you are sons of God, you now have the Spirit of God within you, and use that Spirit to do the best you can. So, Adam, I think you got it next week, so you could explain to everybody what the New Jerusalem is.